Don't you just love it when a developer treats a highly regarded IP with the respect that it deserves?
Just dropping guys.
Case in point here would be RoboCop Rogue City, which was a dream come true for RoboCop fans who were able to step into RoboCop's robo-boots and visit iconic locations and meet recognisable characters from the movie. And that, my friends, is the exact vibe that I, Eurogamer's Ian Higton, got as I played through 3 hours of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle at a recent press event. It's not a perfect game though, so please join me as I tell you about 7 things that I liked about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and 1 thing that I didn't.
Sure you did your best, champ.
The introductory chapter to The Great Circle is set in a wonderful recreation of Marshall College, the place that Indiana Jones teaches at when he's not off stealing things that have been touched by Jesus or whatever. While we don't see the college enough in the movies to get a fully fleshed out, recognisable location like the police station in RoboCop Rogue City, it is nonetheless a great way to start the game, as the whole location is full of nice little indie Easter eggs, and a familiar face in the form of Marcus Brody.
Come on, Marcus. We need to find out what he took.
Yes, righto.
In this intro section, we hear a lot of back and forth dialogue between Indy and Marcus, and it really does allow the player to appreciate the level of detail put into not only the character models, but also the voice work too.
We should look around for the exhibits that were in this display.
Ancient Egyptian, obviously. A depiction of Bastet.
Troy Baker does a great gruff indie voice that, in the wrong hands, could have been fairly distracting, but here his vocals sound pretty much spot on to Harrison Ford's.
What's that?
I said, who is Father Ventura?
Another reason why this section impressed me so much was the attention to detail in the interiors of the college. I played the demo on a big, beefy PC, and visually it looked absolutely stunning. If I hadn't have been up against a time limit, I think I could have spent a good hour or so poking around the offices and classrooms, just drinking in all the visuals for all of the game's incredible little assets that litter the environment. Honestly, with a world as beautiful as this game is just begging for a VR mode. Hint, hint. Cough, cough, Bethesda. You know you want to. It's during this opening chapter that we get introduced to the game's potential antagonist, Locus, although I wouldn't be surprised if there's a twist in the middle there where he ends up being a good guy. Anyway, Indy bumps into Locus, played by Tony Todd from Candyman fame, as he's burglarizing artifacts from the college displays. And after a brief scuffle which ends in Indy getting knocked out, the player is given a little task which helps them get to grips with how some of the game's puzzles will work. You see, the Great Circle wants you to feel like an adventurer and an archaeologist, and a large portion of its puzzles will only be solved through a bit of detective work that involves you paying attention to both visual and oral clues. So, for instance, in this early section, Indy and Marcus need to work out what artifact Locus has schnaffled, and to do that, the player needs to pick up all the other discarded artifacts and place them back in their correct places on the shelves. Hints on how to do this come from both the artifact itself, descriptions of the artifacts found on the damaged display case, and even conversations between Indy and Marcus that go on in the background.
Terracotta, likely Babylonian out of Iraq.
Look at those trees. A recent arrival, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a fairly simple match this to that idea that has been done many times before, but the added archaeological spin made it feel much more in keeping with the spirit of the movies.
003. What was that?
Siwa expedition. He took the cat mummy, Marcus.
Rather than being displayed on a pause screen, the maps in the Great Circle are actually physical items that Indiana holds in front of him as he wanders around the levels. It's only a simple little touch really, but being able to hold a map in front of you as you explore buildings or tombs goes a long way to making you feel like you are an explorer, rather than just a waypoint follower. There are waypoints you need to head to on the map, mind, but I think the physicality of holding it in your hands as you move around makes the whole thing feel much more immersive and gives the player a much more believable treasure hunter vibe. You don't start with these maps either, you have to find them as physical objects in the game world, but once you have one, you can use it to search for out-of-the-way areas that might contain things like a collectible newspaper clipping or two, or even a new archaeological puzzle to solve. All that map talk brings me on to my next point nicely, because during my hands-on, I played 3 different levels, which were all open-world light sandboxes of varying sizes. Marshall College was easily the smallest of the 3, whilst the mid-sized Vatican level showcased a bunch of different routes that the player could take depending on their playstyle. For instance, at one point I was able to use Indy's whip to climb up onto a ledge and sneak past a guard in order to avoid combat. There was also a bit of light exploration where I needed to find and unlock a door after discovering a key stashed in a guardhouse, and even near the end of the level, a gate to unlock that led straight back to the starting area for some Soul-style backtracking in case you wanted to go and find all those collectibles and secret areas that you missed the first time around. And there are a lot of those to find, some of which are easy to stumble upon, while others need a bit more of that archaeological detective work that I mentioned earlier. The final level, Giza, felt much larger than the others, but still quite small compared to something like, say, a Sniper Elite level. This one felt the most alive and organic though, with NPCs wandering around having conversations as Nazi soldiers stood guard or patrolled set areas. In typical open-world fashion, Indy is given a set objective, head to a tent to meet a contact called Dame Noel, but it's up to the player if they want to do that straight away or just go off to find some tombs to explore. I'd recommend following the narrative path just because a lot of things that I stumbled on seem to be tied to the missions given to me by the contact, but there's plenty of incidental treasure troves to find too. One thing that made this level stand out to me though was a healthy dose of humour that came from a panicked Indy trying to feed Noel's pet snake. This all took place in the background while Gina, Indy's companion and probable love interest in the Great Circle, and Dame Noel laid down some fairly heavy layers of exposition. Finally, one thing to note about the bigger maps like Giza is that you are able to fast travel around them using signposts, although obviously you'll have to find these signposts first.
It is something, ain't it?
Combat in Indiana Jones isn't always optional, but most of the time it is, especially when it comes to guns. Indy does have a pistol with him, but we were advised to use it sparingly as its noise would alert enemies to Jones's location, and they would inevitably bring their own firearms to the fight. Indy may be a good brawler, but he's way squishier than people like Nathan Drake and Lara Croft when it comes to bullets, so ideally you'll want to not get him shot at all, because that will result in a very quick game over screen. Instead, you really want to employ stealth and fancy fisticuffs in order to advance through the game without causing too much of a scene. What I enjoyed most about this approach was the Jackie Chan style way I was able to use pretty much anything that was lying around to clobber enemies with.
Don't turn around.
Things like vases or bottles, or even at one point a rolling pin. There's an awesome sense of experimentation with the combat here, and I let out a loud laugh when I tried to knock out a very large enemy by throwing a fire poker at his head, only for it to clang off his skull and send him into a rage. Whether this was a situation intended by the developers or not, it felt like a classic slapstick Indiana Jones movie moment. There was a bit of a Hitman vibe to the proceedings too, because not only are you able to find disguises on some of the levels, but you can also avoid alerting enemies by picking up and hiding dead bodies in dark corners too. The best thing about the combat in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, however, has to be the punching noises.
That little guy packed a punch.
They are perfect, and I could literally listen to them all day. They just make the hand-to-hand combat feel so meaty and brutal, and the punches sound just like the ones from the films. It's lovely stuff indeed.
Aren't there more of you?
While the whip here could be included in the combat section of this listicle, it's much more than just a tool for disarming Nazis. It is a very good tool for disarming Nazis though, and it feels great to flick a pistol out of a soldier's hand as he starts to bring it up into aiming position. Do that and they will exclaim in pain before waving their injured hand, giving you just enough time to close the distance on them during a fistfight and land a massive haymaker on their nose. The other big use for the whip though is as a traversal tool, which allows you to find shortcuts or climb up to vantage points on the maps. What's interesting about this is that, while the game is mainly played from a first-person perspective, occasionally when Indy is using the whip to climb, the camera will cut to third person. This change in perspective could easily be jarring, but here it's done pretty well, and it felt very seamless. When it comes to climbing and running around actually, Indy does also have a stamina bar which you need to keep an eye on. Stamina can be regained from staying still or eating random foodstuffs like the biscotti found on the Vatican level, but losing stamina doesn't seem to make Indy fall from walls when he's climbing. I know because I tried to tire him out, and when his stamina left, he just kind of hung there awkwardly until he slowly got his breath back, which I guess wouldn't be great if someone is shooting at him at the time, but at least he didn't fall to his death, I guess. Adventure points are basically a way for Indiana Jones to gain new skills, but earning them also helps ground you in the world and increases that feeling of being a treasure-hunting archaeologist, as they are awarded for completing specific actions like finding artifacts, solving puzzles, and also from photographing interesting things.
Almost as good with you as Sal's uncle.
You see, Indiana has a camera with him on his adventure, and by zooming in and photographing specific objects, he will receive hints on how to complete puzzles, gain extra lore from his companions, or he'll earn adventure points.
Are these the Guardians?
I would guess so, yeah. These were artisans, masters of their craft. They lived and breathed beauty.
Skills which you can upgrade, by the way, must first be unlocked by finding upgrade books, which are hidden around the environment too. So be sure to always be on the lookout for clues and secret passages, as treasure is always just around the corner. While I did enjoy about 95% of what I played, I couldn't help but thinking that the tomb raiding puzzles, or at least the ones that I tried underneath the Sphinx in Giza, were a case of been here, done that, countless times before. Case in point, moving mirrors to direct beams of light so that they bounce around a room and finally unlock doors. I get that the options for making puzzles fit into historical sites are probably limited due to the fact that the people who made them back in the day didn't have much to work with besides, I don't know, light, stone, sand and spikes, but the old light beam puzzle is such old fedora in video games now that it was a bit of a yawn fest to go through 2 or 3 of them in a row. Off the top of my head, I've done these types of puzzles countless times in Tomb Raider games, Uncharted games, and even in terrible games like Deadfall Adventures. Spike traps, sand traps, twisting a thing to match a thing, and finding your way through the dark with only a torch and some matches is all very Indiana Jones, and as such is totally in keeping with the themes, but at the same time, because they all felt like I'd done them before in other games, it meant that I lost that sense of first discovery that archaeologists probably get a lot. I didn't feel like I was raiding a tomb that had been left untouched for thousands of years. I felt like I was simply retreading old ground, following in the footsteps of other adventurers who had already walked there before.
And there's something behind that.
Feigling! Nimm die Waffe runter!
To be fair though, that is the only big criticism that I took away from my time with the Great Circle. As a whole, this one probably won't appeal too much to people who don't care about Indiana Jones and his adventures, as it leans so heavily onto the source material. But taking into consideration everything else that I played, I think this is going to be something truly special, and I cannot wait to play more.
Off to the dreamlands.
The Great Circle really is shaping up to be a wonderful love letter to Indiana Jones, just like Rogue City was to RoboCop. And anyone who counts themselves as a fan of the movie trilogy, because of course there's only been 3 films, should totally have this one on their radar.
Another satisfied customer.